Hi, everyone. I want to thank you for coming out tonight. My name is Laura Sapienza-Grabsky. I'm the president of the Massachusetts Association of Agriculture Commissions. I want to thank PJ for setting this up for us. I want to introduce to you tonight our speakers and our panelists. This is Dr. Lorraine O'Connor. Did you say you can't hear me, DeLuna? That guy in the corner there. Watch out for him. Okay. This is Cheryl Sawara. She is a Mass Association of Health Board's attorney. We have Skip Vadnais of Mass Farm Bureau. He is on the Livestock Care and Standards Board. And then we have the funny man in the corner. That's Frank DeLuna. Frank is an agricultural attorney. He's an advisor for the Mass Association of AgComs, and he's Farm Bureau's chief counsel. So we have a great panel here to talk about health, animal health, resources, and regulations, and how we can all work together. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to ask each of them to give a little bit of information about who they are, what they do, a little bit more, and then we're going to dig into it. And I just want to know how many people here are on an AgCom? Okay. How many people are on a Board of Health? Okay, so we didn't get any. We were trying to get Board of Health members from communities to come in. So we're going to address this for boards of health. And how many are just people from their community interested in just learning? Okay, great. So we have a really good mix. That way we have a good mix. All right, thank you. I'm going to give mic to Dr. O'Connor.
My name is Dr. Lorraine O'Connor. I work for the Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources, Division of Animal Health. I've been with the agency for over 20 years now. The Division of Animal Health is actually, our statutory authority comes from Mass General Laws, Chapter 129, which is a health agency. So in Massachusetts, we're responsible for the health of domestic animals. We work cooperatively with the USDA, our federal counterparts, with regard to diseases of federal concern. There are sort of lots of those going on as well. We also work with in Massachusetts, there's two humane agencies that with responsibility for animal neglect and welfare issues. Chapter, I don't know what I'm getting too close to. Here. Animal health and welfare are sort of the two parts of the same coin, the heads and tails of the same coin. So we work cooperatively with those two agencies. It's the MSPCA and the Animal Rescue League of Boston, and those are charged in statute with enforcing neglect and cruelty. So we don't have a state agency that does that. We have two private organizations that are charged in state law with doing that, and they have their officers are special state police officers that sort of work with that. We also ask every city and town, as part of the Chapter 129 things, to appoint an animal inspector who does inspections for us once a year to give us a census of where animals are in the state, and to assist us with issuance of things like quarantine orders for rabies exposures and those kinds of things. So there's 351 cities and towns. We hopefully have at least one set of eyes and ears on the local level in all the cities and towns. I have a staff of, I think at the moment we're about at 9 field people to cover the whole state, and that includes our people. We do inspection of dairy farms and sampling on dairy farms. We do inspection of pet stores, licensed stables, garbage feeding, swine operations, and basically anytime there's a call or a complaint with regard to the health of an animal in the state where an infectious contagious disease might be involved. We also work cooperatively with a lot of other state agencies. The Department of Public Health, of course, with all the rabies issues, because those usually involve both people and animals and the exposures to both. And we are sister agencies to the Department of Environmental Protection and to the Department of Fisheries and Wildlife, which are in the same secretariat that we are, the Environmental Secretariat. So we work cooperatively with all of those. So basically, Fish and Wildlife is responsible for all the animals that are not domestic animals in the state, those that are required to have permits because they're wild animals per se, or for the wild animals that are owned by the Commonwealth that may be impacted by things that happen with regard to domestic animal diseases and that kind of stuff. And then the Department of Environmental Protection has been, of late, been very helpful to us in trying to help us get farmers and other people that we regulate into compliance, so that we expect farmers to be good stewards of the land and good environmentalists as well as good farmers. And we're working, one of the mandates that came out from DEP at one point is to try and keep organics out of the waste stream to minimize the amount of trash that we're producing. Organics make a really good feed for animals. So bakery waste, produce, those kinds of things can make really good feed for animals, but they have to be handled in such, oh, that's way so much better. They can, we're trying to keep them out of landfills. We're trying to get them to people who can use those commodities responsibly to feed the animals that they have. And then we have, animals that are being marketed that are, we save the farmer a lot of money on feed supplies and that kind of thing. And we're actually working with a nutritionist out of the University of Connecticut to help people balance their rations so that they can use those products effectively and to the benefit of the animals, to not get them into nutritional trouble. So it's been, like I said, I've been here for more than 20 years. The job's evolved through that time. We also do an awful lot of small animal work as well, and work with our local veterinarians to ensure that we have, we don't have, feral cat colonies that are causing a problem somewhere. We actually, most of the humane agencies now actually have programs where they assist with placing cats at farms, cats that are not adoptable but who could live out a good life on a farm and actually have a job to do and do work there and that kind of thing. There are some new parts of Chapter 140, which is the animal control law, that farmers should know about, because there are some new standards for the use of dogs as protection animals and that kind of thing. So the issue is there's a tethering law in Massachusetts as part of that Chapter 140, so dogs can't be tethered out in chains anymore. But there are ways in which we can work with people to ensure that we can still use them as protection animals for livestock and, noisemakers around the farm, to make sure that we can avoid having some, coyotes don't come in and go after your chickens and that kind of thing, but we have to do it in a way that is also very respectful of the dog's quality of life as well. So there's a lot of new things that are going on in this world, and I think, if anything I've had to learn over the last 20 years is to learn how to cooperate with a lot of different people who have a lot of different responsibilities than I do and have different agendas going on and that kind of thing. So it's great to see so many faces here that I've never met before, and thank you for coming and paying attention to us, because we hope what we're doing is going to encourage the farmers in your community to interact with people and to understand that, some of the things that we've done for 40 years now, we're changing. The world is changing, and how we farm, and especially how we handle animals, is changing, and we want to move that forward in a way which is both respectful of the animals, respectful of the farmer's bottom line, so that he can still make a profit, and yet we understand and educate people who don't understand farming necessarily, because you might want your dog in your bed with you at night, but you probably don't want your cows sleeping on silk sheets. That's probably not the best way to do that. And there are people out there in the world who actually think that cows should be handled in the same way that we would have our pet dog and that kind of thing. So we need to educate those people about cows would really not be happy in your house. So, thanks.
Thank you, Doctor. My name is Cheryl Sawara. I am the Senior Staff Attorney and the Director of Policy and Law for an organization that tries to help those local boards of health that most of you probably don't like very much. We provide technical assistance and legal education to local boards of health throughout the state. And my job, I've also been doing this for more than 20 years. I've been working in municipal law for about 16 of those years. And my job has evolved greatly. When I started, I was really just working on a grant with DPH for tobacco control issues, and then it expanded to chronic disease, and now I'm doing general capacity building for all local boards of health. I'm going to say it was about 6 or 7 years ago, this was my first exposure to agriculture. I don't remember exactly who the first person was that approached me about this issue, but DPH and MDAR weren't necessarily playing well together when it came to trying to figure out a way to get public health and the farming community, if not on the same page, somewhere on the same page. And I walked into this bee's nest of controversy and sort of discontent and distrust. So the Mass Farm Bureau, the Farmers Market Association, the Mass Public Health Association, and myself started meeting. We first started meeting with both DPH and MDAR at the table, and that quickly dissolved. So we decided we would just meet as membership associations and try to figure out why there was why boards of health didn't understand farmers and farmers markets and growing and keeping of livestock, and what the concerns were that farmers had about what boards of health were doing. And I don't know if you want a Board of Health 101 on what our legal authority is, but it's pretty plenary, it's pretty absolute. The best way to describe it, I guess, would be to talk about a case that happened back in, I think it was either the 70s or the 80s, and it was Arthur D. Little versus the Board of Health in the city of Cambridge, which my husband likes to refer to as the largest adult theme park in the world. But what was happening was that Arthur D. Little wanted to establish a chemical warfare manufacturing plant in the city of Cambridge. You can imagine how well that went over. Arthur D. Little had done a lot of its homework with the building department and got their necessary permits and whatever. So the Board of Health, which in Cambridge is just a commissioner form, he acts as the Board of Health, passed a regulation that prohibited the manufacturing of chemical warfare weapons within the boundaries of the city of Cambridge. Arthur D. Little sued the city, and to make a long story short, there were three reports that were commissioned, one from the federal government because they had some funding involved in this, one from Arthur D. Little and one from the city of Cambridge, and they virtually all came back concluding that there was a 99.9%, within 99.9% degree of certainty, there would be no public health effect if this manufacturing business was allowed to come to Cambridge. The Supreme Judicial Court, which is the highest court in Massachusetts that heard that case, it went all the way up there, decided in favor of the city of Cambridge's health department, concluding that 0.1% degree of uncertainty, if the commissioner felt that that was a danger to the community, then the Board of Health had the legal authority to enact that regulation. So that's how plenary the Board of Health authority is to enact regulations, and every time the Supreme Judicial Court has looked at this issue, they've come back and said they will not substitute their judgment for the judgment of a Board of Health. So that's pretty scary. Just because you can doesn't mean you should, is what I tell boards of health quite frequently. In addition, boards should not be looking for areas to regulate, and most good boards don't. They end up in a situation where they're regulating an issue if their residents or there's been an issue in the community and they feel that there's a need to look at this. Right now in Massachusetts, in order to enact a public health regulation from a Board of Health, all it has to be is reasonable, and the Arthur D. Little case is an example of what will be deemed reasonable. there's all the board needs to do is to meet in an open meeting and pass a regulation. There's not a requirement that there be a hearing. There's only a requirement that a summary of the enacted regulation be published in a newspaper of general circulation, and this publication will be noticed to all people that this regulation exists. A violation of a public health regulation, the fine can be no more than $1,000. And in November of 2016, an amendment was enacted to Chapter 111, Section 31, that said if a city or town had an ag commission, that city or town, during the publication period, shall solicit and consider comments on the regulations that have an impact on farming and agriculture. It's a meaningless amendment because the only publication period by law is after the regulation has already been enacted. So there's no requirement that boards hold a public hearing. My agency, MAHB, strongly suggests that for whatever regulation a board is considering, that they hold a public hearing. How the heck are you supposed to get support for a regulation that you're considering enacting if you haven't listened to the public that's going to be subject to that regulation? The only exception to this is Title V issues, which is septic and sewer issues. There is a requirement of a public hearing for those issues, and in addition to the requirement of the public hearing, the board has to provide notice of the hearing, including the date, the place, and the subject matter, so that people can understand what the hearing is going to be about. Notice has to be published twice for 2 consecutive weeks in a newspaper of general circulation, and the first publication is can't be less than 14 days prior to the date. And for Title V issues, the board has to demonstrate why they want to further regulate septic and sewer beyond the state law. There is now a proposed amendment to Chapter 111, Section 31. The Farm Bureau, the Farmers Market Association, MAHB, the health officers, a lot of us work together on the Food System Collaborative, and one of the outputs of that, of the final report, was to try to really delve into this public health agricultural challenge that we have. And as a result of that commission, a proposed amendment to Section 31 now reads, and no one is opposing this. We came up with this together. It's a first step. It's not the last step, but it's a first step toward working together. And what that proposed amendment now says is that a city or town that has an ag commission, prior to a Board of Health enacting a regulation that would impact farmers markets, farms, and the non-commercial keeping of poultry, livestock, and bees, and the non-commercial production of fruit, vegetables, and plants, the board has to provide the Ag Commission with a copy of the proposed regulation, and the Ag Commission would have 45 days to review the proposed regulation. During that time, the Ag Commission can hold a public meeting, and then the Ag Commission would provide written comments to the Board of Health. As I said, this is a first step. From MAHB's perspective, we would always recommend that a hearing be held on any regulation, especially a regulation dealing with agriculture and farming, because quite frankly, the manual of laws that boards of health have to enforce is far larger than their resources. And in my opinion, and my executive director actually is a farmer, they should be looking for help and for expertise, and I would assume that most ag commissions are where they would get that expertise. And also the Ag Commission, if they don't have an issue with the regulation, if they've been working together, which hopefully they have been working together prior to drafting any regulation, they can waive that 45-day. They're not mandated to do that. It's just if they feel the need to do that, they would have the right to do that. So We have been working together for several years, especially now with the trend at the Department of Public Health to encourage locally grown food. You know, as Brad Mitchell said to me one day, if somebody wants to eat a BLT, someone somewhere is going to have to smell a pig. It's really that simple. And I've stolen that and have used that line a lot. But public health has to acknowledge this and work with farmers, not against farmers. And I think sometimes what happens in local boards of health is, number one, they don't have the expertise. Number two, as a lot of you probably know that work with municipal government in some way, shape, or form, when an official in municipal government is asked something, and I'm sure, Frank, you probably run into this too, when they ask their town or city attorney if they can do something, the first thing they say usually is no. So, it's the culture within municipal government, and boards of health are caught up in that culture as well. Brad and I have been to many board of health meetings where we've tried to address this. I mean, public health is still very important. We want to promote locally grown food and farming activities in a healthy way. But some boards really don't even understand that generally accepted farming procedures are exempt from nuisance law. I mean, when I started working in this field in agriculture, they didn't know that. You know, I had to add that to my presentations. They didn't know that. You know, driving a tractor at 7 o'clock in the morning is a generally accepted agricultural farming procedure. Driving it at 3 in the morning probably isn't, although Brad disagrees with me on that. But, there are certain things that you just suck it up. It's agriculture. This is what we do. And it doesn't mean that boards should not be concerned. You know, if there's something going on a farm that is not generally accepted farming procedures, you look at Westport, for an example, that can be stopped. A Board of Health has that authority. That doesn't necessarily mean they need to pass a regulation on it, though. They have the authority just pursuant to their own legal authority if they're doing something that is a nuisance that's not generally accepted farming procedures. So I should just, for my colleague here, MDAR and DPH are on the same page these days. We try to work together on a lot of these things. I know that there are some regulations out there that are antiquated regulations, most of them. Some of them, like the one coming up in Brockton, isn't antiquated, but it was based on an antiquated regulation. What Brad and I have done is we have drafted a template for keeping of animals. It's not ready for prime time yet. Brad has to review it with the Livestock Committee at the Farm Bureau. But we've basically changed the equation. We've taken out all of those arbitrary 2-acre units and all of that stuff. And we've basically said, and the reason that's so arbitrary is I shouldn't be allowed to have one backyard chicken. I don't know what I'm doing. My executive director has a free-range chicken farm with I don't know how many chickens she has. She should do that. It doesn't depend on the acreage. It depends on whether you have a good pest management plan, manure plan, and feed plan. So what this template will do is basically put the onus on the farmer to demonstrate that he or she has those plans. They don't have to be fancy schmancy pants. They can just be drawn with a pencil on a piece of paper and get away from all of the animal health issues, which why on earth Boards of Health want to take those on is above and beyond me. Get all of those issues out and really make it clear that generally accepted farming procedures are exempt from nuisance, and also make it clear that nobody wants to regulate a commercial farm. So that's where we're going. It's been a long haul. Personalities have been involved, and just this natural tension, and part of it certainly is my membership's fault. I don't think all of it is. I think there are yahoos everywhere you go, whether they're Board of Health members or farmers. So, there are going to be outliers, but what we're trying to do is find less outliers and try to make it easy for everyone to work together and move forward, promoting locally grown food and protecting health.
Let me ask you, it seems like there's a lot of echo from the microphone. Would you prefer I use it, or can you hear me without it? Without it. Give it to you then. We'll give you a quick snapshot of who I am, and that probably will help fill you in on why I'm here. I'm Skip Vadnais. I've been a selectman for over 40 years in the town of Rehoboth, so I know what you're talking about with Board of Health. Appointed many of them, disappointed a few. But I've also been a member of Farm Bureau Board of Directors for approximately 20 years, and I am the chairperson of the Livestock Committee that you've referred to several times. And first of all, I'd like to say that we feel that we have established a good partnership with the Mass Board of Health, and that have reached out to us actually asking for information on how their agents can come in and make a determination whether animals are kept, the care and keeping of the standards are correct for what they are. Dr. O'Connor handles the health of it. But the vacuum seems to be on the standards that the animals are kept under. So in trying to address that, we have had a bill filed on Farm Bureau's behalf that would set up a care and standards board at the state level, some appointments made by the governor, representing various bodies such as a couple of veterinarians, someone from the Massachusetts Public Health who is knowledgeable in the area of, is it zoologic? Is that the correct term for interspecies transmission of disease? Okay, and a farmer from a poultry, farmer from livestock operations. So you've got a good mix, because the answer on standards for care and keeping it's a scientific answer, and it's such a vast difference in what is required from breed to breed, but even within a species. I went to Dr. O'Connor invited me a few years ago to a seminar. I believe it was with George Silver, who's the professor that we talked about different housing authorities from Tufts. Who was it? Dr. Saperstein. Okay, and it was pointed out that even with livestock, cows if you would, various breeds have such vast requirements, not just for nutrition, but for the area, for how you keep them in winter time, in summertime, etc., their needs. Then you get the interspecies things. It is very difficult. So we need a board that can provide scientific answers that will develop standards for care and keeping, which is your housing and that sort of thing that these animals require. Now, that would be administered by this bill through MDAR, because we already have an organization set up that knows where all the farms are. It would add some funding to that organization so that they could also now make some determinations, and boards of health, which is your first level of, how do you want to put it, safety net, if you would, which failed in Westport, by the way, for a whole bunch of reasons. And that's why we're all got this big thing happening. Westport. You all heard about Westport, right? Okay, and you're here because you don't want a Westport. Nobody does. Even Westport doesn't want a Westport. The Board of Health really caught hell there, and they're still catching it.
Yeah.
Not all their fault, because it's a very complex area. The problem has to do with policing, it has to do with authority to enter the property. All these things would be covered with what we're proposing on, is it Bill 441? Is it?
Add one thing to
Certainly.
Westport.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry for interrupting, but one of the issues in Westport
Let's get a drink.
is that when the board found out, which they found out much too late, which was their own fault, But when they found, when the health officer at the time in Westport found out what happened, the board, well, she tried to pass a bylaw. She submitted a warrant article to town meeting in Westport that would have required very minimal standards, but it would have given the board a way to get in before everything turned the way it did, and town meeting voted against it and said we do not want Board of Health involvement here. And she was subsequently fired by the Board of Health for having started that. So that's just one piece of Westport support.
Well, that tries to show you how difficult the situation is, because you have a problem now, and then you have politics interfere with the problem, and that's what that was. And okay, that's the way we do things. You have a town meeting, and you decide, the fate and future of your community. That's fair, but it's difficult because you're asking people to make judgments on an area that requires expertise and knowledge, and not just book learning stuff. We've got plenty of book learning appointments on that board I was talking about. It would come underneath the Commissioner of Agriculture, and it would give authority with this, where MDR does not have authority now. The only authority for care and keeping right now lies with statutorily with the MSPCA and the Boston Animal Rescue, and they are one pretty thin. So, and we really have a grassroots situation here, and a golden opportunity to make things right. So that gives you the framework of why I'm here. I'm not going to say any more until you get the questions and answers and stuff, and I'm fair game. Have at me.
I'm Frank DeLuna. As soon as you can't hear me, raise your hand. We'll put the mic back on. I'm an attorney. I grew up in glass greenhouses, real glass. That shows my age. And went to law school, became a patent attorney. Eventually, I returned back to my roots, became counsel to the Department of Food and Agriculture at the time under Gus Schumacher. And for those who don't know, Gus passed away yesterday. He had a heart attack. But great guy, great concepts, drove us nuts. I am currently my practice is about 95% agricultural law. I do represent the Farm Bureau, Cape Cod Cranberry Growers, Mass Nurserymen, Mass Flower Growers, a few others in there. I am on the board of directors for Essex Agricultural Society, better known as the Topsfield Fair. I left some propaganda on the table. I also am with the Massachusetts Association of Agricultural Commissions. I'm on my town's agricultural commission itself, a few other things. My practice is all-encompassing. Everything I've heard everyone say, I've dabbled in, whether it be APRs, boards of health, zoning. I've drafted significant legislation for Farm Bureau. I just wish the legislature would leave our drafts alone and they'd work.
Could someone summarize what happened in Westport?
I will take a shot at it, although I need to say to you that I have to be careful what I say because it's still being litigated, so it's still an open case. Those people have been indicted, but it's not gone through court yet, so I can't speak in detail about that situation. But basically, it was a tenant farm, which is a farmer who owned a large lot of land, and he had a very loose leasing arrangement with folks to farm parts of his property. So one of the problems was that the part of the department's charge every year with our local animal inspectors are that we ask them to give us a census of all the animals in their community, and there's some questions about basically, how many animals are there. We ask that it be done, but generally between October 1st and January 1st. At the end of the year, because I know that that's the department, and if I'm speaking me, it's sort of the department knows that that's the low end of the scale. That's going to be the low number of animals, because basically it's going into wintertime and people have dropped their numbers down and culled what they needed to and that kind of thing. So we know that that's a low ball number, but if we didn't do it that way, then we would have like somebody's at their high ball and someone else is. So we know everyone should be at their low ball numbers during that period of time. So in 2010, that property had never been inspected because it didn't appear in the register of I have a really big mouth and that echo's making me crazy. So if you can't hear me, I will stand up and yell.
It's a different mic.
It's a different one.
Oh, it's
Okay.
So, in 2010, that place didn't appear, and it ended up being a law enforcement case at that time because law enforcement and the humane agencies went in. There was some involvement by the department at that time when we were notified by them of a problem, and they thought that the situation had been corrected. So now the place is on everybody's radar screen, and now 6 years later in 2016, we have some additional problems with animal husbandry, care, housing, how animals are being taken care of, that kind of thing, and the same sort of loose arrangement of, people and whatever. So the challenge there is, part of this is we're all trying to work cooperatively, but we all have to take our piece of it and do this. And one of the things that I found when we work with local communities is, the goal is never to be at odds with sort of anybody about what's going on, but if we end up, I got to tell you, we end up with the weirdest things that, my life is very interesting, because weird things happen all the time, and things like you can't imagine what goes on. And so what sort of happens is you go in and you look at this, and it's like, well, this is a big mess, and, it's like, well, what kind of animals are they, and they're feeding some weird thing, and I don't know if they're nutritionally okay or not, or I don't know if they're this, and well, the housing looks bad and they're not cleaning up and there's all these kinds of weird things that go on. And so you're like, what I encourage everybody to do is we don't ever say it's not my job. I should, 20 years ago, I should have said that ain't my job, because my life would be but it'd be a lot less interesting too. So what I try to encourage, and I think as the ag homes, what I want you guys to do is, instead of looking at it and saying, well, that's the Board of Health's job, or that's Farm Bureau's job, or that's the Department of Agriculture's job, is if we all sat down, and I'm not sure, I can't speak for the department with regard to the Livestock Care and Standards Board. I don't know that we're necessarily fully in support of that bill, but we've talked about that and that kind of thing. So there may be some things that we'd want adjusted there. But one of the things is we all have to take ownership of what the part of it that we can do and what is on our plate to do. And if we all do that, then what happens is, well, I'll take care of this animal health issue because I know that one's mine. And the humane agencies, and again, over 20 years I work with them routinely all the time. Because, for instance, a couple of things. If I walk into a place and they're skinny animals, there's a couple of reasons for that, right? One is they're sick, and they could be sick because they have some disease that's causing them to be sick. Or maybe they're just not being fed enough groceries. So when I step into that, we usually go sort of arm in arm with the humane agency and try to figure it out. So we walk in the door together and knock on the door. I don't go alone. I go with them, because what happens is I get, you know the game, right? Well, they told me I could do this. She told me I could do that. He told me I could do that. If they're not there, if we all walk in together, now try that. You can't. It's like playing mom and dad. You don't get to play mom and dad against one another. I learned that a long time ago. So we go in together with them. If it is an animal health issue, then we take the lead. They never walk away. The humane agencies never walk away from me. They just go, yours, we're here, we'll back you up. Same thing if we walk in there and the issue is a humane issue, basically they're just not being fed enough and they're being fed the wrong things or whatever, then they walk in, they take the lead, I don't walk away, I back them up. So and we do that with USDA as well. So there's some diseases that are clearly local issues, state issues that we have problems with, we want certain things fixed. There's other diseases that are bigger than us. The avian influenza we had, and that's a national disease. If we had foot and mouth disease, that's a national disease. Brucellosis is a nationally controlled disease. So those things, we walk in with USDA and say, if it's one of those big diseases, we issue the quarantine order, but they're going to tell me how they want it run. And I sit second chair to them, they tell me what they want me to do. So all of those things happen. Well, Westport was a big mess. There was so many things going on there. I shudder to think I couldn't count them on, it would take me everybody's hands and toes to count all the things, crazy things that were going on there. I think what happened was since 2010, people knew it existed, but nobody knew what to do to correct it, and nobody took ownership of their piece of it to do what they could. And again, I'm not expecting the Humane Agency to walk in there all by their lonesome and deal with this. We all have a role to play, and maybe sometimes the role is merely I walk in. I've been around a long time. 20 years is long. That's ancient in the kind of job that I do. So I walk in there, and the fact that I've known that farmer for 20 years, and I walk in and shake his hand and say, "Look, we had a problem. This is not okay." Sometimes it's somebody got old, somebody got tired, the equipment broke down. Whatever we were doing is not as lucrative as it used to be. Farming's hard work. The younger generation is not real comfortable, even, certainly not comfortable reading, myself included. I hate reading. But people are not comfortable with the labor stuff. They're comfortable. Everybody wants to market your fruits and vegetables or market your animals for you, right? Because they can get on the computer and take all these pretty pictures. And all the young people are comfortable doing that. They're not comfortable mucking out the stall and cleaning, the equipment and, making the tractor run and all the stuff that goes along with that. So part of that is we try to always, bring in who we need to do to get it done. And the goal is, I was brought up, my family farm has been in our family for over 100 years. And I don't remember the first generation, but I remember my grandmother. And I've known forever that my first and foremost is I'm going to walk in there respecting the fact that this is a hardworking person who owns this property and it's theirs, and I'm here, I wouldn't have put it past her with to be at the door with a shotgun telling people to get out. So we walk in there respectfully to say, look, we have an issue that we need to work on and whatever. Most of the time that works. It doesn't always, but most of the time it does. Where it becomes really complicated nowadays, because we have, for instance, kids that, young people that that are not as interested in the part of ag that traditionally is the sweat and equity part of ag. So somebody leases land to somebody who wants to do that part of it, right? So your land is being used for ag. You get all the tax breaks that you should for having your land being used as ag. But you really got to be able to know who the guy is, right? He's got to be accountable for what's going on your property because you're the landowner. You need to know. You need a phone number that works. You need to know the guy's name, right? I don't know. I wouldn't lease properties. I wouldn't let somebody on my property if I didn't know who they were. I want to know what his reputation is. I want to know how he's going to do things. I want to know how he's going to take care of things. And then there's all those other things that have to happen. We have to comply with the building codes. We have to comply with the Board of Health. And again, in most cases, I can talk with the Board of Health and say, we should not have manure running in the streams. We can all agree on that, right? We shouldn't be, we need to be careful of certain things that are going to impact public health, because you have, for a good reason, have statutory authority to do a lot of things. However, don't take on what is not your role to do. And we've had this issue, again, I've talked with local health agents. I have this brilliant idea, Doc. Don't you think this is a great idea? We're going to require in my town, I don't think they have a horse in that town. I don't think there's one horse that lives in that town, but Eastern equine encephalitis. I'm going to require that every horse in this town be vaccinated for Eastern equine encephalitis. I'm like, why? Well, because it's Eastern equine encephalitis, and don't you think that that's a good idea? Yes, as a veterinarian, this is just me. You're an idiot if you don't vaccinate for Eastern encephalitis in Massachusetts. You're an idiot. Because the vaccine is one of the best that we have. It works. Your animal will be protected. It will not die of Eastern equine encephalitis if you vaccinate it appropriately. However, no offense, and
none of that stuff is in this.
You know exactly where I'm going.
Yep, you're
with
right.
This.
You're right.
Horses play absolutely zero role in the transmission of that disease. They are a dead-end host. Mosquitoes bite infected birds, wild birds, all the stuff that's flying around here in the world. They bite infected birds. The mosquito gets infected. It bites a horse. The horse dies so quickly that it's just literally, it gets bit, it gets the disease, it's dead. And they read the textbook. They're dead usually within 24 hours. Dead. And they do all the things so they play no role in transmitting it. It's important to know that the horse died of that because it's a sentinel. An unvaccinated horse is a sentinel. Well, you know what? 40 years ago, it's nice that horses were sentinel because they had to die, so we knew that there was eastern equine encephalitis around. We do mosquito pools all the time through the Department of Public Health. Why on earth would we let a horse die? That's my personal annoyance with it. Why would we let a horse die of that? But there's no need for you to regulate. Do I think somebody's stupid if they don't vaccinate their horse? Yes, but it has nothing to do with public health.
Right.
And so the issue with that is if animal health could say that we should require certain things, well, I have to be careful about what I say about that because if I tell you you are mandated to vaccinate for X, Y, or Z, is there liability associated with that? The lawyers can tell you that. But if I'm telling you you need to do something, it has no public health issue. Your horse will die if he gets eastern equine encephalitis, or he'll wish he was dead. He'll die. But that has nothing to do with public health, and that's on you, and sadly the poor horse. So there's things where we work with public health, but again, when you point that out to them, most of the health agents will go, oh, I didn't realize that they didn't have anything to do with that, and now I'm okay with that. So just back off on that. Yes, we do a public health release every year talking about telling people, please vaccinate your horses, please do this, that, and the other thing. But honestly, quite frankly, not everybody can afford to do it. So we hope that they will do it. We try to encourage people to do it to the best of their ability. And as far as I'm concerned, any way they can get the vaccine into that horse, if it's done appropriately and it's a vaccine that's going to work, great. Because then we don't have cases of this.
Lorraine, can I jump in on that?
Sure.
One of the things that Westport has done is stimulate boards of health to make more and more animal regulations. And what we're finding, this is going to what Lorraine was talking about, the boards of health are now imposing a best management practice standard on animal care, animal maintenance, generally across the farm. One thing you have to bring back to your communities is the standard is not best management practice. The standard is the average, the normal agricultural practice. And there's a huge, huge difference.
And
Best,
I'm sorry, and that's absolutely right. The challenge we had in Reading when we were crafting their regulation, they were one of the first to actually understand that they shouldn't be requiring all these vaccines and these units and
I taught there for 12 years.
But the challenge is, and I'm not sure it's still there, but on the Department of Agricultural Resources website, the generally accepted farming procedures, the title of it is best procedures. So if the board needs to get to know what that is, the title is best, which is why that was put in that reg. Now and I teach this all the time, that you hope eventually the generally accepted would become the best, but right now they don't have to be the best. The challenge is the way it's worded on MDAR's website.
So the best management practice was to have all the horses vaccinated, but let's face it, that's not the normal agricultural practice.
Well, and what our goal is when we, part of the goal with our website is to educate the public. So I'm not going to tell you a minimum standard, right? I'm going to say to you, this is what we feel. Because again, it's about gradually raising the bar so that everything gets better all the time, right? We don't backslide and we don't do stupid things. We actually get better all the time. And so the bar goes up. The more people do the right thing, the bar goes up. And then in veterinary medicine, in farming practice, and all of this, there's that reasonable standard. So the issue for that is, what would the reasonable person do given whatever the circumstance is? We're trying to educate people to be better than just okay. So we say, we make recommendations based on those things. And then there's things where part of the educational part of this is everything isn't one size fits all. So, because the world has changed a lot in the last even 20 years, but over the last 40, 50 years, things have changed a lot. So one of the things that happens is people get carried away with, there's a black and white line. There's a lot of gray in the world. There's things that are not black and white light. So one of the things that Skip and I were educated about, we sat down and talked with the experts about this. So for instance, we talk about something as simple as shelter. And my friends at the Humane Agency say, like, Lorraine, can't we just tell everybody they have to have a 3-sided shed? No, we can't. And I tried to say that, I beat my head against the wall trying to say that, no, that's not reasonable. We can't say that about everything. So let's go talk to the experts. So we go back to someone like Dr. Saperstein, who has now retired and doesn't ever want to talk about this subject again, so I understand completely. But one of the issues, for instance, with regard to shelter, we're talking about a big, fat beef cow. And the big, fat beef cow is out in a field. First of all, they're big and fat, so they don't have very much difficulty maintaining their body temperature, right? They're wearing a leather coat, right? And if they are standing in a grove of pine trees that all overhang, and they're in the middle of a blizzard, the wind doesn't blow through, the snow doesn't land on them, and they're perfectly fine. There's not a big issue. So somewhere in the very distant past, someone said beef cows and a grove of pine trees would appear to be adequate shelter, because can the animal maintain its body temperature? Certainly can. That is not a dairy cow, and those of you guys who know cows, you know what beef cows look like, little square blocks? And dairy cows, everything's kind of, they look like, no offense, but old ladies with everything's hanging off them, because that's just kind of how they're built, right? Everything goes in their bag. So they're shaped differently. So when snow and rain lands on them, it doesn't roll off, it sinks in and slides down. So they don't have a lot of body fat. They have more difficulty maintaining their body temperature. And I'm sorry, but a grove of pine trees is not a bunch of oak saplings that are across the street. That is not shelter. You may as well have a bunch of, twigs standing up or whatever. There's no windbreak. There's nothing there. Do they need a roof over their head? No, they need a windbreak. In some cases, it depends on the body mass of the animal, how much fat they have, the kind of coat they have, the condition they're in, the kind of food they're being fed, how windy and what it is. My horses stand outside with a foot of snow on them. They have the 3-sided shed. They don't go in it because they don't mind the snow, because the snow rolls off their fat little backs. But if it's a driving cold rain, they will not be outside in that. They will be inside the building, because that penetrates their hair coat and they can't stay warm that way. So they will take themselves inside the building, but they have a choice to do that. So we go to another thing. Okay, 3-sided shed. So I have to say to them, okay, we have a 3-sided shed. I was in one of these 3-sided sheds. It was a barn. It was 30 feet long, 10 feet deep, with a 10-foot roof. So it's 10 feet high, 10 feet deep, and 30 feet long. There was one litter of week-old piglets in it. They had a 3-sided shed. Are they warm?
No.
No, they're freezing to death because it was a wind tunnel. So that's not adequate either. So you can't, so then it's like we have boards of health that write, no offense. But, sometimes people write regulations. You need to have a 10 by 10 foot stall for a horse. I don't know, my friend's Minnie doesn't really need a 10 by 10 foot stall. And the draft horse up the road, it's not big enough because he needs a 12 by 12. He's that big. So you can't, there isn't all this. And then I have this best one. I keep thinking I'm going to take this photo. I have a calendar that came to me. It's a sheep industry calendar. And the January picture is this ewe. And what is she wearing? She's not wearing a leather coat. She's wearing a wool coat. And it's about this, one side is about this thick. And she's got it was a really pretty photo either at sun up or sundown. So it's glistening across her coat. There's an annoying little piece of straw on her nose that I want to take away. But other than that, I look at that picture. She's out in the middle of whatever. She has no issues whatsoever. As a matter of fact, our conversation with Dr. Saperstein was, if I locked that ewe up in a barn, she would probably get respiratory disease and be sick. Because She could take care of herself just fine. Tight barns cause respiratory diseases, all kinds of issues that happen with this. What we're missing nowadays is we're missing common sense. Common sense is no longer common. That's the problem.
I think more and more what is happening is boards of health, and I might cause some problems in this, have no authority, as far as I'm concerned, to make regulations relating to animals unless that regulation has a direct impact on human health. The regulation that is the camel's nose under the tent is a regulation relating to stable permits, which boards of health can regulate. But if you read the stable permit statute, their regulation is to size, ventilation, lighting, and drainage. Those 4 items. And the regulation, as written in the statute, relates to the inside of a structure. So more and more boards of health, and Laura and I have battled this in our own town with our Board of Health. Their authority is limited, and they don't like to hear that. But I hear all sorts of horror tales about boards of health, and part of it is because many members of the boards of health are 3 generations removed from the farm, and they don't understand it. We've got a town that passed a Board of Health regulation that required all chicken coops to be whitewashed with lime on the inside.
I heard about that.
Right? Well, you know, years ago, our dairy farms used to lime the walls of the dairy barns. All right? Has nothing to do with chickens. All right? But they remember. Someone remembers the dairy farm had lime sprayed all over it. So they indoctrinate it because they think it is a agricultural practice.
I can one-up you on that. There is a town, which will remain nameless, that permits roosters pursuant to their regulation, but only if you remove their vocal cords.
Walpole.
Yeah, no, Rentham, Walpole.
Walpole.
Well, I think what we're outlining here is that where we started this conversation is the standards need to be defined by science, not by emotion, and not by politics. And to bring you up to speed as to where we are with your boss, Commissioner LeBeau, he and I I am spearheading this Board of Standards for Mass Farm Bureau, and he and I have had several discussions because Laura and I are both members of the Mass Board of Agriculture, and that's where the debate is now taking place. The Commissioner and I believe the Board of Agriculture agree with they agree in policy what we're attempting to legislate. We have the devil's in the details, and we're trying to work out some areas of whether or not this board the members of the board would have to vote to approve a standard, or whether the commissioner himself would just make the standard. So we're talking about that, but your department has signed on to the point where the commissioner, as of Thursday, has said that if this legislation fails, he will, because he believes that he understands how complex this is, he will establish this board as outlined in the law, except it'll be under his appointment powers, and it'll be advisory instead of statutory powers. So MDAR, in the person of the commissioner, is on board with the theory of the language and in attempting to solve the problem, because as you just demonstrated here, most people don't have the expertise to know the difference of what they mean well, but sometimes that causes more problems than not.
Well, and again, I'm not I fully admit I am not on the commissioner's speed dial. As a matter of fact, when I met him, I suggested that if I was hanging about his door, it probably wasn't going to be a good day. He might want to close his door and leave early. But one of the things with this is agriculture in Massachusetts is different than in the big livestock states. And we have to keep that in mind. So the issue is what we don't, what happens in, and I'm on national conference calls all the time. We have a National Assembly, which is all the state veterinarians, and they talk about various things. And, there are occasions, and I in 20 years I've gotten smart enough to, sometimes I just talk when maybe I shouldn't, but I'm like, who the hell wants to hear from somebody in Massachusetts when, we've got North Carolina with all the pigs and the chickens that they have, and, these other, the dairy farm in the Midwest, and California's got, the smallest dairy out there's got like 2,000 head of cows. What do they want to hear? But the thing is, what we have a diversity going on here. So what we have is all these, like, they have somebody who has this giant dairy farm or this giant pig farm, and that's what they're dealing with, is just that. What they don't have is all these, we have sort of a mix mash of a whole bunch of things going on at the same time. So for our ag is different here. It's different. New England is different. It's not just Massachusetts. Now, Vermont has a lot of cattle, and Maine and Connecticut both have a couple of big laying operations. But the rest of it is sort of like, it's pretty common to have somebody with some laying hens and some sheep and goats and a couple of cows and maybe some pigs all in the same place. And then you got to be thinking about all the things that I'm not just worried about pigs and what diseases I'm going to bring to pigs and stuff, but the pig's going to make the chicken sick, the chicken's going to make the cow sick, or what other things are going to happen in the midst of things. And so trying to get people to do that. So the other thing is that because agriculture is different, it's managed differently. We have a lot of people in Massachusetts who believe in free-range stuff. As an animal health person, I'm not a big fan of free range from a health perspective. Because what happens with chickens, it's like you pick up everything that there is from the wild birds that are flying by, and that means we are more at risk for avian influenza in our local populations than they are in places that have really good biosecurity in the Midwest with these really big farms. Mm-hmm. When we look at like dairy farming, for instance, this is the thing people don't want to talk about. Stanchion cows, when I started working for the department 20 some odd years ago, we had a lot of stanchion barns still in place. Those cows lived to be 12, 14 years old. And then the move, it's easier for everybody, and it looks nicer in a certain sense that so the cows are now all in these freestall operations. Well, if you're in a stanchion barn, your life is limited. Your food is put in front of you. It's kind of like, breakfast in bed every day. Their food is put in front of them. They don't have to they go out and they wander around the field for a while. They come back in, they line back up, they go right to their stalls. They're fed again. So there's no competition going on. You put them in a freestall operation, boss cow gets pushy and somebody else don't eat. That's kind of how it is. The legislation that recently passed, that all these big humane groups are like, we had one farm in Massachusetts left that still had battery caged hens. One farm that had about 3,000 birds. There has never been, to my knowledge, in the 20-some odd years that I've worked here, nobody in Massachusetts ever used gestation crates in pigs. And we don't have any veal farming to speak of. So all this legislation, this big deal about we have to pass this legislation to make it better for animals, that bill, I'm just going to say it did nothing. When nothing that happened in Westport had anything to do with that bill. And the challenge for it is, I guess what we're trying to say is that the Livestock Care and Standards Board, however it plays out to be, I think we've been in agreement with it all along, because I think, it was Ohio that started the first one, and I had a conversation with Brad about this is how we fix the HSUS bill, is to do something like Ohio did and establish this instead. So one of the things with that is, what I'm saying is that bill has done nothing. There's a lot of people, sort of patting themselves on the back and saying that bill has done something to change agriculture in Massachusetts or make it more humane, and I can tell you it didn't. Because of all the mess that was going on in Westport, hens and battery cages wasn't one of them. So there's a lot of things. And then we look at, I talk to people about, there's the free-range people that want their birds out all around. There's disease issues with that. Caged hens, mortality in caged hen houses are much less so than in floor birds. And it just has to do with, pecking order. That's a real thing, it happens in hen houses. And if you're going to be low man on the pecking order, if you're in a cage of 6 birds, you're low man of 6 birds. If you're in a floor house with 10,000 birds, you're a low man of 10,000.
But again, none of these issues are Board of Health issues,
Correct.
and they ought to keep their noses out of this.
I don't know why they'd want to be involved in the first place.
Because they have the Grace Chemical case gave them such authority even on anticipated events. They don't even need a real event. But one of the things they do, and I think it's important that we talk about this, so I'm going to try to, and I'm not necessarily the person to do it. No, not yet. A lot of boards of health are trying to regulate farmers markets. All right. There is a role in a farmer's market for the boards of health. Some of them go just way, way beyond. An example, I represented a client in a town very, very, very close to this town who said that if the farmer cut the greens off the carrots or the beets, that was now food preparation, and they had to have a certified kitchen because that meant food. Now, the farmer could cut the greens off in the field and bring the carrots up to the farm stand, but the farmer could not cut the greens at the farm stand because that was a violation. Can you talk to the role of Board of Health?
Nothing would make me happier. This is another area where, here's part, in defense of some of my membership. Massachusetts is using still to this day the 1999 food code, federal food code. When that code was written in 1999, I don't think there was one farmer's market. Now, Massachusetts, the Public Health Council, is held hearings and is in the process of amending the food code to the federal 2013 code with some additions for Massachusetts. It's better, but it still doesn't fit farmers markets. So you've got these boards of health that have to permit them because unless they're just selling raw produce, and the carrot thing is just the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. But it's not the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. So they're in a situation where they're trying to adopt the food code to a farmer's market, which is nearly impossible to do even if you're a really good board of health. So some of the bad boards of health, an example I got from Jeff Cole, he called me, he's the executive director of the Farmers Market Association. He called and there was a town that was requiring a vendor at a farmer's market to get a food service permit. Guess what the vendor was selling? T-shirts. So I had to call the health director and say, this is not appropriate. And they said, oh, yeah, you're probably right. So, but the other piece of the food code, which boards of health have failed to address, and which we're going to start working on after we're done with the livestock regulation, there's a variance provision in the food code. So if someone can demonstrate that, someone has a stupid regulation that requires refrigeration, and the farmer can demonstrate that I can keep this food, fresh fish, whatever the heck it is, I can keep this very cold just using a cooler, then fine. The local regulation should be, there shouldn't be a local regulation on that in any case. But regardless of how the health director and the Board of Health is interpreting the food code, they can vary the food code. And my feeling is that that's what they should be doing, is varying this food code when it makes perfect sense to vary it. I mean, we've got farmers
But
markets.
we do want them, and I think that the important thing is you would want them involved in the places where, again, that it doesn't need to be refrigerated, but certainly milk products and meat products and stuff that are being sold at farmers markets should be required to be kept cold.
Absolutely. And
Well, they would
that's in the
also-
food code.
They would also require a license from the DAR. If you're going to sell milk,
They don't sell milk.
yeah, right?
From what-
The
But for meat and fish, of course, I mean, the food code mandates that it be cold. I'm not saying
Right.
that they shouldn't require that, of course
no,
they should.
right.
But if they can demonstrate, and what we've seen actually is the refrigerated containers on a July midday day, and it's being opened constantly to take
it's
things
not
out,
holding.
it's not holding the temperature as well as a cooler would. So we're just saying, use your common sense. Of course, you need to protect public health. There's no question about that. And you need to support locally grown food. But you need to get to yes for the farmers market in a safe way. And also in somewhat of a consistent way. You know, there are great variations in boards of health and how they treat farmers markets.
And we as farmers too need to be sure that we're not playing fast and loose as well.
Oh, absolutely.
With some of the stuff that goes on, because for instance, if you want to sell meat, if you want to sell meat of any kind, you have to sell it, it has to be slaughtered at an inspected plant, at a USDA licensed plant where there's a meat inspector.
Yeah.
That's a requirement. Again, people play games with me too because I must look stupid. You can get away with it if you're selling the whole animal to somebody, you're selling a sheep or goat or whatever, and you sell it on the hoof. You can go to a custom plant and do that, but you can't sell it to a restaurant, you can't do anything. So there's specific rules that you have to follow about that, and sometimes people play fast and loose with those rules. Like, we had somebody recently who was doing pig roasts, and they're doing the pig roast themselves, so they're selling you the pig, but then they're being paid to do the pig roast, and it's not one pig roast for your family, it's a pig roast where the public comes and does things, and that has to be a USDA inspection. So we had again, I got involved in a mess because it was a mess at the farm and whatever, and so now I'm with the Humane Agency and the DPH guy and the whole we show up, and the conversation was, this is not, okay, so now I pay $10 extra to send it to the USDA plant. So we, again, need to be responsible for what we do, so what we do is we do it the way we're supposed to be doing it as well, and the farmers are aware of that. So better, safer, less liability for you if you do it the way you're supposed to do it, and that kind of thing, and then everybody's on the up and up with it, and then we're not at issues with the local boards of health. I spent many years of my career being, terrified of DEP. Absolutely terrified of them and what they have. If they want to get you, they got some big fines they can go after farmers with. And, spent most of my career being very careful and very wary of where that agency was going to go with stuff. And I have found them to be, in the last year, nothing but helpful to us in resolving issues with people, getting people on the right track. When we go in as a partnership with them, we had to talk about, farmers need to be good stewards of land. I believe that. I was brought up that way. So we shouldn't be, having our pesticides stored improperly, or that's right on our agency because we have a pesticide department. But, if you are a small oil if you do your own oil changes on your tractors and those kind of things, you are a small time use person, just get in touch with DEP. You just have to log what you do with your spent oil so that they know it's not going into the stream or something. Not hard to be compliant with those guys. It's not hard to get yourself where you belong with them, but the expectation is that you will get there, And I've gone out with them on inspections. I mean, we walk into every, places, and you can't burn trash. Right? Farmers can burn shrubs, whatever. You can't burn trash, you can't burn pallets, you can't burn paper, you can't burn plastic. So don't have a big burn pile that, is going to cause a big issue because you're not allowed to burn that. You can burn pallets if they have they're not painted in any way, shape, or form. You can burn certain kinds of things. So there's things that you can do, but you guys need to be, as farmers, we need to be in compliance with that as well. And hopefully, our local ag comms, the ag comms are a good idea if they're done well. So your job is not to support every stupid thing the farmers in your town want to do. It's to educate, hopefully, the other boards in the town so that they're farmer friendly, but it's also to educate the farmers. So you're sort of the liaison between the farmer and the people who may not know what's going on.
Gentlemen, right now, there's still plenty of opportunity for 441 to be adjusted. It's in committee, and there's opportunities to amend language, and it's already been amended once to take out some stuff that no longer is relevant. And as I said, the commissioner is, and the, as a matter of fact, I believe next month there's a further discussion by the Ag Board, which gives direction to the commissioner, advice to the commissioner, as to how to proceed with this. So it's not a done deed. It's Farm Bureau's bill, so whether they choose to amend it or to try and put it through legislatively, I can't answer that. I don't know what they're going to do with it. I had a Farm Bureau meeting Monday, and we discussed it. It's in committee.
I can say to you at the department level that having the ability to sit down with other agencies to work out some of the problems that we run into sort of routinely is something we've been clamoring for this for a long time. So I think that if it was enacted, whether it was by statute or because the commissioner decided to do it, I don't think it will go away. Because there's too many times my colleagues at the humane agencies, for instance, and stuff, they're just sort of like, we have a headache at the end of the day with some of the things that we're dealing with, and it's like, God, if there was just some way you could sit down and bounce all these things off a bunch of people, maybe someone with a new idea would be helpful to do this. So we've been looking at this because there's some of the places that we have issues with, they're pretty simple to deal with, but it's becoming less and less easy to deal. It's not one thing going on that we have a problem with. It's like these places that have multiple issues that involve multiple agencies. And I remember, back 10 years ago, there was an issue in the city of Boston where they now have what's called a link-up program, and what they found was that they were having all these places that it turned the humane agencies were ending up at because there were animal issues, and the social services people were ending up at the places because there were social issues, domestic violence, and those kinds of things. And then there was the police departments there because there's drug issues or whatever. And what they finally recognized that they were all knocking on the same doors over and over again, so they put together sort of this program where, when they walk into when an agency gets called into one of these situations, they sort of brainstorm how they're going to fix whatever's going on in this part of the community to try to do that. So I don't think if we can get it, even if it's at the commissioner level, that he says this, because the problem in Massachusetts is always, can you get the legislature to see it your way and actually get something passed? And at some point it's like, it might be faster to just do it at the commissioner level and get it done, because it's so, I really think it's a necessary it's a necessary part of our moving forward with solving some of the problems that we're having. And I'm not at odds, most of the time I'm not at odds with the local boards of health. When I think they're wrong, I tell them they're wrong, but in most cases I found them to be very useful in trying to resolve a lot of the issues we get to. Because again, I'm not just dealing with farm stuff, I'm also dealing stuff with the small animal stuff sometimes too, and they can be a real good advocate for helping us get those kinds of situations resolved.
The important point here is that for boards of health is you're going to receive some guidance on standards, whether it is at a legislated group that produces it or the same group that's been appointed. And it's a good point. What happens, and that's part of the argument that we've been having with our current administration, is what happens when you're not there and we have a whole different staff, because, we need a long-term solution.
Well,
let me just finish your thought.
Except for the fact that, I've been through now 5 commissioners. I've been here long enough he's the 5th. And there's, yes, but like I said, we've gone through 5 different commissioners, and there are things that they can, again, the important part is to get it up and running. now, while we have a commissioner who's supportive of having it. Once it's in place, because there's policy things that they really have to go out of their way as the commissioner to deal with this. Like I said, Commissioner LeBeau, that, you know, I have a lot of respect for the man as well. He's a good boss, and he's the first one to admit, I mean, he's from the nursery industry. That's his expertise. So the very good news about this is that he's been very supportive of us at Animal Health to say that you guys are the experts in this part of what goes on. So, tell me what I need to know and how we should do this, because you guys have more expertise in this than I do. And he's been really good about that.
There are trainings, I know, for animal inspectors.
Yes.
Some of the animal inspectors are usually within the jurisdiction of the Board of Health. They frequently feel overwhelmed. They're not sure how they determine whether a cow is sick. So they're statutorily required to be the animal inspector, but they need some help. So if this guidance document, whether it's a guidance document or a law, I would be a little concerned just because there's a dollar amount attached to this bill. So that's always a challenge when there's a dollar amount attached to the bill. That I think boards of health would welcome the guidance from, whether it's guidance or a law, it would be helpful to them.
So one of the things that would be helpful for us too is that we have, our animal inspector meetings actually start next week. It's tradition, used to run in November. We try to get them in October now because we're traveling around the state and trying to make sure we get good attendance and we don't have snowstorms and whatever. So the next 4 Wednesdays, and I don't remember which one is which now, but we're in Middlesex County, in Bristol County, in Amherst at our office in Amherst. I think it is.
But those aren't mandated.
They are not mandated, but one
Which
of the
is
things that
one of
would
the
be
problems.
incredibly helpful is we get a core group of people that come every year to the meetings. And we get occasional new people, newly appointed people that will come to the animal inspector meetings. And we go over, the rabies regulations and the changes that have gone on, and then sort of all the current event things, how to do a barn book and all the kinds of stuff that we need to do. And whatever timely topics have come up, like last year we talked a lot about avian influenza and stuff like that, but they're not mandatory meetings. And in some cases, now in the eastern part of the state, there's a lot of the animal inspectors are being paid a reasonable salary to do that job, or it's part of their duties as an animal control officer or whatever. And there's places in, other parts of the state, the center of the state and western Mass, where people don't get paid a lot of money to do that. And in some cases, there's people that have been doing the job for a long time that have never been to a training. Through these efforts that we have is like, bring your friend kind of thing and twist some arms and get somebody here to do that. So one year I had a conversation with, somebody, a friend of mine's husband brought like 5 people that had never been before but had been doing the job forever, and now they come every year. So if boards of health would allow their people the time or give them the opportunity to make sure that they got the notice of the meeting, that they encourage them to go, whether they can pay them to go or not, but if they could encourage them to go and get this kind of training, they're welcome. The meetings are open to everyone. So animal inspectors, animal control officers, boards of health themselves, they're welcome to come to those meetings and do training. It's really hard to supervise an animal inspector if you don't know what it is that they're supposed to do. And
every one of our meetings are televised, and one of the things that we do hit, not only just for the farmers, but for the local people, we talk about what are the pests that they can look for in their gardens, at that time of year. What are the weeds that are starting to seed and what you can do to prevent them? How you can harvest the weed and prevent future germination. We talk about what pests are starting to come out of their various stages, and what you can do with either a pesticide or a non-pesticide control for them. These are things that the farmers in our community know. Right, and they share their knowledge with the homeowners that have these vast, beautiful gardens that continuously spray pesticides on them, unlike what the farmer typically does. So we get this conversation going. It's on TV. We're well watched. And these are some things that you can start incorporating in your own agricultural commission.
When we do adjourn the meeting, I will hang out for about 10 minutes or so. In case any of you were bashful about asking a question, come see me, just between us, okay? And I'll stay as long as you have questions.
We did a session on beekeeping, vastly popular in our town. And it's a half-hour session, went through some of the, opened a hive and talked about it. One of the most watched cable TV sessions in the on the town. We did other one of our members is an orchardist, and he talked about how do you prune fruit trees, right? And people watch it. The Ag Commission becomes visible, and that's very, very important. You've got to be visible. It's more than the tractor in the parade. It's constantly in people's faces. Then you're taken seriously.